next movie is a classic horror called Night of the Hunter. Robert Mitchum is so eerie in that one. He is pretty good looking. Doesn't seem to like kids.
John, Night of the Hunter. So we've gone on to our classic horror, and John, I will say that Night of the Hunter is technically not what you would consider a classic horror movie. As a matter of fact, when it came out, it was considered a noir thriller. And that does make more sense, but I would say that watching this movie, it's scarier than most of those classic monster movies or movies that take place in a castle. Definitely. Mostly because of its disturbing themes and some ahead of its time ideas of murder and cruel things that go on in this movie, and some absolutely magnificent cinematography that we'll get into. So we're talking about Night of the Hunter from 1955, and this movie stars the brilliant Robert Mitchum, and he is fucking great in this movie. He carries the entire movie, though I do love the kids. We'll get into those kids, but Robert Mitchum is
one of them named Pearl.
Pearl and Jack. Pearl and Jack, and they're both great characters, were really well fleshed out. This movie was based on a novel that's loosely based on the real event of a man named Harry Powers who murdered 2 widows and 3 children in 1932. Definitely makes the movie that much more frightening that this was real events. The plot involves a serial killer played by Robert Mitchum who poses as a preacher and pursues 2 children in an attempt to get his hands on $10,000 of stolen cash hidden by their late father. Directed by Charles Laughton, and this movie is ahead of its time based on how it looks, based on some of the tense moments.
Well, it's ahead of its time, but it's also playing homage to the silent era of film, and an even more classic era than its own 1955 time period. The visuals in this movie are amazing. The entire movie feels a bit like a fairy tale or like a Mother Goose story. There's elements of it that directly pull from kind of fairy tales and Mother Goose in the imagery and things like that. But also it's using kind of German expressionist imagery.
A lot of lighting.
Silhouettes and the set design. But it's also mixing in all that noir element that it, for its time, was labeled noir.
Yeah.
And it shows, especially in the character, the Robert Mitchum character, the way he plays it. I think he went on to do, a couple years later, he went on to do Cape Fear, which is clearly another standout noir from that time period, and a similar character. There's a lot of differences in those characters, but the menace started here.
Yeah.
Like, just a classic for Robert Mitchum, and super menacing. He's got the love and hate on his hands. That's a fun little character distinction, and a fun little moment when he explains why that's there. It would just creep me out and say, what the fuck, get away from my children, but the mother in the story is
this guy seems like such a good shooter. You should, 2 days after your husband is hung, you should get him to take care of your kids.
The lighting and set design is some of the standout stuff in this movie. The direction, obviously, Charles Laughton. He's known for his acting. This is the only film that he directed, and I actually heard something today that it got a bunch of bad reviews at the time.
Yep.
And because he's an actor and he took all that to heart, he said he didn't want to direct again. But clearly, after the passage of time, this movie is regarded as a classic. People love it, and they recognize the genius in his direction. Like it really feels like we could have got so many interesting films out of this guy as a director, and he did not feel like he had what it takes. And clearly he showed he was an amazing director with this one film. He was discouraged by the climate of Hollywood at the time, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, it was one of those movies that was critically panned when it first came out, and it's since been considered somewhat of a masterpiece of suspense and celebrated by tons. One of the directors that comes to mind where you can watch a lot of YouTube videos on that just fucking loves this movie is Spike Lee.
This film, Night of the Hunter, Robert Mitchum has love and hate tattooed on his fingers.
Do the Right Thing has the love and hate.
There you go.
Ring.
In my film, Do the Right Thing, there's a character named Ray Rahim, has brass knuckles that says love and hate. In fact, he gives a speech, the same speech that Robert Mitchum gives about the battle between love and hate
I watched this movie twice in preparation for this video. The song that he sings, it's a preacher song. It's like a church song.
Yeah.
But he just does it in this evil way.
Leaning on the everlasting arms.
It's not a traditional horror movie, but it's scary because Jack and Pearl, you put yourself in their shoes, and this is full spoilers for a nearly 100-year-old movie, we'll say. It's not that old, but Jack is a very, very well-written child character for the time, and I think the actor was really good. Pearl is the younger one, so she's just kind of stupid and just gets led around or whatever, but the character of Jack is like a protective big brother and just from the get-go knows what's going on, and like you didn't see characters like that with kids back in the day like that. The stranger comes around and tries to, you know, kind of bed the mother, and the kid's just not having it. He just sees it right away. And I love how Mitchum just doesn't give a fuck about what the kids think. He's just like, fuck you, like I'll rip your goddamn arm off if you don't tell me where that money is.
Go ahead of me, the both of you, down those stairs.
But I think that the movie works so well because his motive as this murderer, it's not really about the money. And when you realize that it's not about the money, it's about this goal that he has. Like he's a guy who is a razor sharp, moving forward force of nature. And once he gets his eyes set on something, he has to win that. Yeah, the money is important, but he's playing with these people more than anything else. He's playing with the kids. It could be very cut and dry, like, well, I just want the money, just here's this thing. But instead he does these creepy things. He creeps around the house, he creeps around and stares. And the staring in those shots, fuck, those shots are so good. The shots of just the silhouette of him like whistling and singing that song. And sometimes you don't know what's real and what's not because the camera is using this optic way of like showcasing him through the window, but then when it closes up to the kids or to Rachel, the older lady towards the end, it kind of just turns back into a concrete wall and you're like, oh, is this really happening? Is this not happening? Or are they all just fearful of this guy?
His approach on this, where it's kind of like a fairy tale, like the moments where you see Shelley Winters' character under the water.
Oh my God, talk about that shot, dude.
That's just such a beautiful, amazing shot.
It's so slow. You don't even know what you're looking at first. You just see like these strands of things.
And there's not a lot of horror, like true, what you would call, you know, the visuals and the moments.
That's the biggest horror moment.
But that one is. But it's done beautifully, and that's the way horror can be sometimes. You can be looking at something that's super beautiful, yet you know it's a very disturbing image. And this movie has a number of them. It's set at a time where, you know, they can't go too far with it, but it finds ways to still be disturbing and creepy. So yeah, Harry likes to murder with a switchblade, and apparently
slaps her first.
Doctor, you're wanted on the phone.
See, yeah, one of the things I find, like the unseen horror in a film like this, where you're kind of moving along, and you're like, yeah, it really doesn't have a lot of horror, and then just one moment where you've seen this body under the water, which I'm really impressed with how they did the effect.
I don't know how they did that.
It must be a dummy, but it's a very impressive dummy.
Yeah, I have no idea how they did, because they lingered on it for a long time.
Shelley Winters.
Yeah.
But in that moment, this like vagrant kind of guy that lives down by the river or whatever.
Van down by the river!
That has like the river raft,
the uncle,
or whatever that character is. He comes across her body, and so later we see him talking to himself, mumbling to himself over his bottle of whiskey or whatever, lamenting of like, oh, I can't go to the police, I think they're going to come after me. But he describes that her throat is slit open.
Yeah.
And like, you don't see that in that shot.
No.
But it takes me back to that shot, and it takes me back to like the moment where he comes down on her with the knife or whatever. And just, this movie didn't have to show it, doesn't have to have many moments of horror, but just a line of dialogue coming from that character about her how open her throat was or whatever is just like, it sells it. It makes this movie a horror movie.
That whole sequence of him in the room with her, slapping her, pulling out the switchblade, that beautiful lighting right on her while she's laying in bed.
Like I don't know, like they're in a cathedral or something.
Yeah.
He's holding the knife high. Like, it's very reminiscent of silent film era horror.
It is.
Like so the cabinet.
And as he's holding the knife high, then we cut, and then we go back to the kids, because most of this movie's from their perspective, which I think is great, and that adds to the fear of everything. But then you hear what's going on, like a car pulling away. You know that he's taken the body somewhere, and he's building an alibi at the same time getting rid of a body or whatever. And I didn't know the movie was going to go there with like gorgeous shot of her dead body like under the water. I just was mesmerized. I couldn't believe what I was seeing for a movie that old and that kind of shot, like how they did that.
Because this is before Psycho. You know,
this is 5 years before Psycho.
Oh, well, like his introduction, where the kids are kind of looking out the window, and his like the shadow of his hat just fills the frame, basically. This very ominous. I mean, it just does so many amazing things to make shadows be ominous and playful throughout this movie. Shelley Winters' character is just such a strange.
She doesn't make a lot of sense.
Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I guess that she felt that the choices she made to marry her first husband, who stole the money and was put in jail and hung, that got them in this situation. That character is played by Peter Graves, the pilot in Airplane, who asked the little boy if he's ever been in a Turkish prison.
Joey, have you ever been in a Turkish prison?
So I think she feels regretful about the choices she had already made in life, and honestly thought that marrying this minister was a road to redemption for her, because that's all I get in those, especially in those final moments where she's basically saying, "That's fine, you go ahead and kill me.
She's a
leave
loony.
My parents, or leave my children without any parents."
She's a loony, dude. Like, well, the first scene in the movie that really gives you an idea of how not creepy he is, but gnarly he is when she's like wanting to fuck him.
Yeah.
And he's just like, "What the fuck are you doing? Like, you know, look at yourself in the mirror, you fucking," you know, he's just belittling the shit out of her. And then he's just like, "Now you can get into bed." And you're like, holy shit. Instead of her getting creeped out by it, she gets more and more invested into wanting to make him happy. And you're like, okay, she's completely gone. And the movie's very sad when you think about it, because at the end, Jack and Pearl have no parents. Both their parents died.
I like to think that Pearl went on to become a murderer
and fuck a scarecrow.
Yeah.
Well, baby, me so horny. Me love you long time.
Okay, so there's two really, really great scary scenes. Well, there's more than that, but there's two that really stand out. And one is the basement set piece.
Yes.
I love the basement set piece because, again, the mother's dead, nobody knows it, and he's fucking with the kids. He knows they're down there, but he doesn't really care to even look, which is even creepier than him going down there and looking.
I can feel myself getting awful mad.
The whole boat ride scene, I just think that's so brilliant.
That's another scene that's very like fairy tale, and the music is like a lullaby.
Yeah.
And so it plays into the whatever the kind of Mother Goose or grim fairy tale kind of aspect that this movie presents. The score to this movie and the little lullaby that is sung by children throughout the movie, there is a version of that on Fantoma's director's cut that Mike Patton sings. This movie's slightly been on my radar the moment that album existed. Clearly, you know, Mike Patton does a very interesting version of it. So it's like, oh, I got to hear, you know, that in the context of the film. And once I did, it's like the moment I had to rewatch this for this and turned it on, it was like, oh, there's that music. Yeah, it just brings it all back. So there's two old ladies in the film. There's the one that helps push Shelley Winters to remarry.
And then there's Rachel,
who we all think is super annoying. And then, okay, is her name Rachel?
Rachel's kind of like the hero
the
of
protective old lady who takes in the two kids after their boat journey.
She's awesome.
Run.
Great quiet set piece of the movie of it. Just, it's so quiet, it's so tense. But then when she does shoot him, and the noise he makes.
Oh, the Looney Tunes noise?
The Looney Tunes.
Now all of you skunks, clear out of here!
I feel like we don't fully know his fate. He's being taken away to be hung. There's a lynch mob on the run.
She tries to start a lynch mob, but it doesn't like work. So I guess the final set piece was great, but like oh, he's caught, and she tried to lead a lynch.
Because there's actually a trial.
There's a trial, and that like always just ruins
30
everything.
seconds of screen time.
You can't handle the truth!
I was on the edge of my seat a couple of times, and that's mostly due to Robert Mitchum's haunting performance some beautiful cinematography that's scary, and it looks more frightening than a lot of your standard horror movies from the 50s. So watch Night of the Hunter. That's my advice. John?
And now that I think about, this being 1955, not that Hitchcock hadn't already established himself and put some things out there that kind of played into the horror realm or whatever, but horror wasn't really horror at that time. But this predates Psycho, and I feel like, not that Psycho borrows from this, I just think I really wish that this director had continued on down this path.
Me too.
Because I think we would have had, two guys kind of working that could bring us this kind of visual version of like a serial killer, because he establishes early on in the movie that he's done this 13 times, I believe. Part of his motivation, I know you were talking about kind of the money and stuff like that, not being totally his motivation, but he does say that he's getting messages from God or being told to do things by God.
Yes.
Now, I don't fully believe it. I think everything he does in terms of this persona as a preacher is to manipulate people. I don't really feel like he's a believer, at least not the way that you should be. Clearly he's a murderer, so he doesn't fully understand what it means to be a believer. And
well, the opening scene of him is like, he thinks he's talking to God.
Yeah.
Dear God, thank you. You are such a good God to us.
So I think he believes it, but I think deep down inside he knows that he is pure evil.
Oh, it's a total excuse. Yeah.
The opening shot is kids playing and finding a body, and then cutting to him driving away talking to God about who's going to be next and where does God want to send him next.
Hey, you're not my father. Well, you know what, son? You better step in line. There's a lot of stuff like that still resonates today. Like, crazy motherfuckers stepping into a woman who just needs a father there for the kids, no matter what the person's like. And in this movie, she's known him for like fucking not even a day, and she's like, we should get married.
You finish your evening, all right? I'll hang out here, and when you're done with your date, we'll get married.
I did find it interesting that Shelley Winters, there's a film that I really love, I think it's early 50s, so I think it came out before this one, that Shelley Winters is in like a love triangle. It's called Place in the Sun. She's in a love triangle, and she draws the short straw and ends up at the bottom of a river as well.